The boots were sitting upright just outside the tent footprint, toes pointed at the tree line. And when I came over the rise and saw them, the camper was already gone. The fire had been cold for at least 2 days, and the permit card in the site post was signed out in handwriting that was almost right. I've been thinking about those boots for a long time, and I think it's about time I find out what actually happened. I'm Evan Whitlock, and these are the field logs of Lantern Bend. It was autumn of 2011. I was 23 years old, and I'd been a ranger in District 7 North Fork for about 2 years. 2 years is long enough to know your patrol territory the way you know a house you grew up in. Which slopes drain fast after rain, and which ones hold water. Which creek crossings flood first in early spring. 2 years, and you know a place. I still trusted the institution back then. Mostly. That trust had been wearing thin for a while. It does that when you work inside a system that knows more than it tells you. Small things. Cases where the wording didn't quite match what was in the original report. Incidents filed under headings that didn't add up right away. You notice these things, and then you let them go. Because not letting them go means following them somewhere you're not ready to go yet. At 23, I wasn't. The welfare check came in around 8 that morning. Solo backcountry permit, 4-night stay in the Sector G adjacent backcountry, about 4 miles off the Long Pine trailhead. The camper had been due to sign back out 2 days prior. No contact, no check-in, nothing. That's not automatically a crisis. I want to be honest about how routine this felt when I drove out that morning. People lose track. They roll an ankle and camp an extra night, or drive home and forget to sign out, and they're already back at their kitchen tables when you're hiking in to find them. I had done 20 welfare checks in 2 years. I was expecting a vehicle still in the lot, or a man with a sore knee at the trailhead who felt bad about the paperwork. I reached the Long Pine lot around 9. One vehicle was parked there. An older, dark green, mid-sized truck. It was dry on the outside, with no fresh mud on the wheel wells and no recent tire tracks coming out of the lot. I noted the plate in my log and started the hike in. The terrain from the Long Pine trailhead goes through maybe a mile of open hardwood, before a climb through a steeper section that drops you into a drainage, and then you follow the drainage north for a couple of miles before the trail branches uphill toward the G-adjacent sites. In mid-autumn, the hardwoods were past peak. Most of the leaves were down, and the ground was layered in wet ones that made your footing soft and quiet. The light was completely flat, a uniform gray that came through the thinning canopy with no angle to it, no shadows anywhere, just even gray light on gray bark, and the dark of the evergreens where the upper slope started. It wasn't dead quiet. There were birds somewhere in the canopy, and about a mile in I heard something large moving through leaves maybe 40 yards to my east. Probably a deer. The ambient sound was there, but the woods felt like they were paying attention that morning. They weren't hostile or threatening, just turned towards something I couldn't see, and I was walking through the middle of it. I noted it and kept going. You work in backcountry long enough, you feel things like that. Sometimes it means something. Sometimes it's just a Thursday in October, and your brain is doing its job. I got to the campsite marker around 11. It was set back in a shallow bowl, about 20 yards off the main trail, uphill, with a southward view through the trees. I'd been to that site before, not often, but I knew it. I came over the rise and down into the bowl, and I stopped. The first thing I noted was that it was clean, cleaner than the permit conditions required. The fire ring was cleared. The tent footprint was pressed into the ground the way 4 nights of use will do it, but the tent was packed and gone. There was no scattered gear, food scraps, or evidence of anything left carelessly. The site was meticulous. Some campers are like that. I noted it and started the walkthrough. That's when the wrongness started coming in layers. Not all at once. The boots were the first. I came around the eastern edge of the site and saw them positioned just outside the tent footprint on the north side of the clearing. Brown leather hiking boots. They were well worn at the heel, with laces still tied, sitting upright in the dirt with the toes pointing at the tree line, with about 10 inches between them, even spacing and angle. I stood there, and I went through the scenarios. Someone left them. Left them as in abandoned them, taking other footwear instead, or left them in a hurry. Something happened fast and they ran. But you don't run and leave your boots upright. They would have fallen and been tipped over in the mud. These were sitting the way you'd place a pair of boots down if you were trying to show them off. The spacing was intentional. The angle was deliberate. The toes were a compass needle pointing at the trees. I didn't touch them. I moved to the fire ring. A normal campfire burns from the center out, with the deepest char in the middle, and getting lighter toward the stone ring at the edge. This one was the opposite. The darkest burn was at the outer edge, against the stones. The center was barely touched. Whatever made that fire, it didn't burn the way a fire usually burns. I crouched over it for a while, drew it in my log, and couldn't come up with a reason for it. Then there was the permit card. It was in the plastic holder at the site post the way it was supposed to be. The sign-in was dated correctly, initialed, and signed in clear and controlled handwriting. The sign-out line had the date, the time, the signature. The same pen was used. I could tell from the ink color and the stroke width. I held the card up and looked at the two lines side by side, sign in above sign out. Something was wrong with them together, and I knew it before I could say what. It was close. That's the thing about it, close enough that, in normal circumstances, you wouldn't look twice. The capital letters in the sign-out were a little bigger than the sign-in, and the lowercase letters sat a little higher on the line. The pen had moved with the same consistent weight, but the letter shapes had something off about them I couldn't pin down. The closest I can get to explaining it is, the sign-in was written by someone who had written before and knew how letters and numbers are formed. But the sign-out was written by something that had watched it being written and copied the motions. It was close enough to fool you on a first look. But if you held the two lines together, you felt it rather than saw it. Something behind the pen had been learning, not remembering. I told myself I was imagining it, but wrote it down anyway. The next thing off was the food hang. The rope was still strung between two trees at the right height for bear country, the bag on, which made sense. A camper packs up, they take their food, but nobody takes the bag and leaves the rope. And the knot tying off the end at the anchor tree was wrong. The rope was secure, the tension correct, but the knot looked like it was tied by someone who knew how knots work, but had never actually handled rope. A ranger hitch, a trucker's hitch, a bowline, cleat hitch, combinations of those. I'd been tying them for 2 seasons. This was none of them. It was the right answer arrived at from the wrong direction. A knot tied by someone who's used rope before has a feel to it. Something easy in the way the loops sit. This didn't have that. It was copied, not learned. I photographed it and spent 5 minutes trying to identify it. I couldn't. The radio was the final layer. I pulled my handheld and keyed it to check in with dispatch and report my location on the welfare check. It didn't give me static. It gave me a tone. Low, even, slow. A single pulse on a repeating interval. I released it and keyed again. The tone continued. I held the transmit key for 10 seconds, which in radio use is a long time, but nothing changed. I released it. The tone continued, 1 pulse every 4 seconds. I timed the interval on my watch and wrote down the pitch, interval, and the time. I'd never had that come back on my radio in 2 years on the district. I wasn't afraid, not the way I know fear, which hits in the chest and makes you want to move. This was different. The campsite felt like it was staged. Everything was present and was roughly in position, but the wrongness wasn't in what I was looking at. It was in whatever had put it there. Something had figured out what a cleared campsite was supposed to look like, and built one. Almost exactly right. Close enough to pass a quick look, but not on further inspection. The life in it was missing. I was standing there trying to find words for what I was standing in, when I heard boots on the trail coming down into the bowl. It was Tom Briggs, my supervisor. 20-some years in the service at that point, and he moved the way you do after that much time in the backcountry, like he'd decided a long time ago that he didn't need to hurry, and the rest of him had accepted that. I respected him. He knew the district the way you know the back of your hand. He could tell you where every drainage went in wet season, and which ridge lines held heat latest into September. He gave direction clearly, and he was fair, and there was something settled about him I'd never been able to put words to. Not peace. More like someone who'd decided a long time ago what he was and wasn't going to deal with, and had been living with that decision long enough that it just became the way he moved. I walked him through the site. I showed him the boots first. He stopped about 3 feet from them and looked. He didn't crouch or move closer. He just looked at the boots, then at the tree line, and then he scanned the ground between them slowly. His face didn't move, and I could tell he was working to keep it that way. He stood there for a long time. He didn't touch them. I took him to the fire ring next. He crouched at the edge and studied it closely. Then he stood, brushed his palms together, and said nothing. I handed him the permit card. He took it from me and held it up the same way I had, sign in line over sign out line. He studied it. Then he handed it back.
Could be the light.
It was a dead, flat, overcast morning. There was no light. There was no angle of light that would change the appearance of 2 lines of handwriting on a permit card. That wasn't an explanation, and he knew it, I knew it, and he knew I knew it. The words weren't an answer. They were a wall between me and whatever the actual question was. I keyed my radio so he could hear the tone. He stepped up beside me. 1 pulse. 4 seconds. Another pulse. He listened, then reached over and switched it off. He didn't say why, He pulled his welfare check form from his chest pocket, unfolded it, got his pen out, and started writing. What are you putting for his status?
Vacated. Personal property left on site. Welfare check concluded. No distress indicators.
I've got the boots, the fire ring, the handwriting on the permit card.
I hear you.
He didn't look up and kept writing. I watched him move through every section without slowing, without lifting his pen. He wasn't working anything out. He knew what every box said before he got to it. He signed the bottom and folded it before I found the words. He stopped at the edge of the bowl on his way back to the trail. He looked back at me from maybe 20 feet away.
You've got everything you need here.
I stood at that campsite for another 10 minutes. I recorded a voice note on my field recorder. About 4 minutes of me describing what I'd found and what Briggs had done and said and not said. I recorded it because, even then, I knew I needed a record that wasn't the official one. That afternoon, I wrote my report. I wrote what Briggs told me to. Vacated, personal property left on site, welfare check concluded. No distress indicators. I filed my report and went home and told Lauren I'd had a routine day. At the time, I told myself he was bored, that 20-some years in had worn away any instinct to make more work for himself, and the boilerplate phrase came out automatically like you do when you've said them enough. I held on to that because it was the easiest thing to believe, and I was 23 and I knew enough to be confused, but not enough to know if I should be scared. I know now he wasn't bored. And I know because I finally asked him. Briggs retired after 25 years in the service. He lives about 40 minutes from the district we worked. Out past a county road I know, but haven't driven in a while. We've stayed loosely in touch. We know roughly how the other one is doing, but not much more than that. He knows what I do now, and what I spend my time going through. I've never explained it to him directly. He's never asked. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon in early March.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom. It's Evan.
Evan. It's been a while.
It has. How are you doing out there?
Can't complain. I could, but I retired, so I've stopped making the effort. How about you?
Good. Lauren's good. Emma's getting big.
How old is she now?
She'll be 7 in October.
Time does that. She like the woods?
She does. Has her own spot inside the property line she goes to by herself.
You want them to know the woods early, before they get old enough to think they're supposed to be afraid of them. That's good.
I wanted to ask you about something.
I figured you weren't calling just to check in. What's the question?
I've been going back through some of my old Ranger field logs, the ones from District 7, and there's a welfare check from the fall of 2011 that I've been thinking about for a while. I wanted to ask you about it directly. Solo permit. Sector G adjacent backcountry. 4 miles off the Long Pine Trailhead.
The site in the bowl. North side of the ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember it. What do you want to know?
Why did you sign so fast?
Because I knew what I was looking at. You want me to keep going?
Please.
The camper, his name was Mark Collier. 41 years old, taught middle school science, did 3 or 4 backcountry trips a year, always solo, always permitted correctly. 3 weeks after we walked out of there, they found him 11 miles north of that campsite. sitting against a pine tree facing south, facing back toward the campsite.
Alive?
Alive, eyes open. If you moved in front of him, he'd track you with his eyes a little, a slow recognition of movement. But there wasn't anybody behind them. He was admitted to a facility under a different name with a FL case designation. I know that because the transfer paperwork crossed my desk, not because anyone sent it to me. Routing error. It was pulled from my inbox within an hour of landing there.
What's a FL designation?
A filing category, federal adjacent, means the case documentation is held separate from standard welfare and search and rescue records. It doesn't appear in the normal indexes. The file exists somewhere, but you'd have to know exactly where to look, and even then. I'd seen that designation twice in 25 years. Both times it crossed my path by accident, and both times someone noticed, and both times nobody discussed it.
How did you know what you were looking at the campsite? Before Collier, before any of the transfer paperwork. You walked in, spent maybe 15 minutes, and signed off.
That campsite had been flagged before I ever worked District 7. Same GPS coordinates and marker number. 3 prior incidents over 14 years, at minimum, that I was aware of. I knew because when I was new to the district, maybe 3 or 4 years in, my supervisor at the time sat me down with what he called the flagged terrain list. Sites in the patrol territory with a specific designation and a specific response vocabulary. The words you write, the boxes you check, how fast it goes, vacated, personal property left on site, welfare check concluded, no distress indicators. That phrase, for a site like that one, that's the phrase. You write those words, you sign, and you get yourself and your rangers off the terrain. That's the complete protocol.
That's it.
That's it. You don't file supplements or submit photographs. You just write the phrase and you move. Every ranger in that district with more than 10 years knew at least one phrase like that for at least one site in their sector. Institutional memory. Nothing written down anywhere official.
Why?
Because the alternative was ending up on a different list.
What list?
Names. Rangers I knew or knew of. People who pushed back on sites with that designation. Who filed complete reports. Submitted photographs. Who refused to write the phrase and documented what they actually found.
What?
One of them resigned inside of a month of filing a full supplemental on an incident in a different sector. I knew him personally. The way the resignation happened, well, it wasn't entirely his choice to make. Another one made it about 2 years before a medical situation ended his career. He had a breakdown severe enough that he couldn't continue in the field. Legitimate as far as anyone could document. But it came right after he'd been pushing hard on something similar, and the timing didn't sit right. A third one got transferred to a district 3 states away. Transfers happen, but the timing again.
And the fourth?
The fourth was a ranger I'd met a few times over the years. Good man, experienced. He didn't resign or transfer, and he didn't have a documented breakdown. He's just not in the records. No retirement file, termination or resignation logs. No injury reports or transfer documentation. 22 years in the Park Service, and if you go looking for where he ended up, you won't find it. He's just not listed anywhere I was able to look.
A man with 22 years in the service and no record of what happened to him.
If there's a record, it's not where records normally are, and I looked.
You never said anything to me. All those years we worked together, the whole time I was on that district.
I had a daughter, Evan. She was 4 years old back then. You think I didn't want to say something? I thought about it. I turned it over for years. But every time I looked at those 4 names, I thought about her, and I thought about you. And the fact that the only people I ever watched come through it intact were the ones who wrote the phrase and walked away. I was protecting you the only way I knew how to. The only way that actually seemed to work.
Is that something you believe? Or something you told yourself?
Both. For a long time, both. I don't think those are as different as they sound.
The radio. The tone that came back when I keyed it. The repeating signal. Do you know what that was?
They said it's a protocol acknowledgement signal, specific to terrain that's already been attended to by whatever process is running on it. What it means is the site had already been documented before either of us got there. You and I weren't the first to know about it. We weren't first responders. We were the last step. The step where a ranger signs the local paperwork so the district record matches what's already in the system above it. We were closing the loop.
What kind of process? What's running on those sites?
I don't know exactly. And I made a specific choice not to know. Knowing is what put those names on the list.
What about the boots? They were placed toes toward the tree line, even spacing, deliberate angle. I've been thinking about that specifically for 15 years. Why would they be placed like that?
The boots weren't careless, Evan. Whatever was at that campsite, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't moving through. It placed them. That kind of placement is intentional. That's a message.
What's the message?
I don't know exactly what it was, but I know I walked you back to that truck before you had time to sit with it long enough to start working it out.
I appreciate you talking to me about this.
You were always going to ask eventually. I just didn't know when. You're doing something I couldn't do. I don't know exactly what to call it, but it's something. Take care of yourself, Evan, and those two girls of yours.
I will. You too, Tom.
Yeah, actually call again. Don't wait so long.
I still have the photographs I never filed. All of them. I've looked at them a lot. The boots from 3 angles, and the fire ring from 2. The permit card front and back, with the 2 lines of handwriting side by side. I've been looking at the permit card, the original. I kept it and nobody ever came looking for it. I've been looking at the 2 lines of handwriting and thinking about what Briggs said, that it was a message. I still don't know what the message was. 15 years of thinking about it, and I don't have a clean reading. But I've been doing this long enough to know something about messages left in places like that. Not every message is meant to be read right away. Some of them get left somewhere on purpose, and they just sit there until the right person comes along. The boots, the inverted fire, the sign-out signature that was almost right but not quite right, the knot that looked like it was tied by someone who'd never made one. None of these were accidents. Whatever left them was deliberate. And it had been to that site before. 3 times over 14 years by Briggs's count. Whatever was at that campsite in the fall of 11 knew the permit system. It knew what a sign-out card was for and how to fill it out, what the site should look like after a careful camper packed up and left. It had studied long enough to get the surface right. And then it left 1 fire ring burned wrong, 1 knot nobody could identify, 1 pair of boots with their toes pointed at the trees, and 1 radio signal that said, according to Briggs, everything had already been seen and documented by something watching the same territory the Park Service was watching. And then it left. I still don't know what the boots were saying. I don't know if it was a warning, and I don't know if it was something else entirely. Something that knew, even then, that I'd eventually be somewhere I could read it. I just don't know yet if it was warning me, or if it was introducing itself. If you made it all the way to the end, drop sign out in the comments below. And tell me, if your supervisor had showed up and filled out a form like they already knew the answers, would you ask why? Or would you just accept it and just move on? Let me know below. And if you want more raw tapes, strange emergency calls, and field logs from Lantern Bend, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. It helps the channel more than you know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.